Einen wunderschönen guten Abend, herzlich willkommen. Schön, dass Sie den Weg hierher gefunden haben, trotz oder vielleicht gerade wegen der Hitze hier in unser schönes klimatisiertes Kino und mit uns gemeinsam in das kühle Nass abtauchen wollen, denn dieses Gespräch, diese Veranstaltung ist Teil des Rahmenprogramms unserer Sonderausstellung im Tiefenrausch. Darin geht es um Unterwasserbilder, Unterwassertöne, um all die ästhetischen Mittel und gestalterischen Elemente und auch die Klischees, mit denen der Film unter Wasser immer wieder arbeitet. Und der Ton ist da natürlich ganz, ganz wichtig. Der Ton schafft Atmosphäre, der Ton erzeugt Emotionen und der Ton lässt die Unterwasserwelt erst richtig lebendig werden. Mein Name ist Michael Kinzer, ich bin Kurator der Ausstellung und ich habe zwei ganz spannende Gäste hier heute, die sich bestens mit Ton auskennen und die auch schon beide Unterwasserszenen vertonen mussten und Unterwasserszenen akustisch gestalten, untermalen mussten. Und wir werden ein bisschen allgemein über Ton und Töne in der Tiefe sprechen. Und dann läuft der Film Leviathan, ein ganz interessanter Dokumentarfilm mit einer ganz besonderen Ton- und auch Bildgestaltung, der zum Teil auch das Schaffen hier inspiriert und beeinflusst hat. Und ich werde jetzt aber ins Englische switchen. Wir haben leider nicht die Zeit, dass ich das alles übersetze, aber wenn irgendwas am Ende unklar ist, kann natürlich gerne nochmal nachgefragt werden. Also es ist dann auch noch ein bisschen Zeit, Fragen zu stellen hinterher. Okay, but now I would like to welcome our guests. At first, Rana Eid from Beirut, one of the most important Lebanese sound designers and also a film director herself. Just now we showed her documentary Panoptic. Maybe some of you have watched it just a few minutes ago. Rana has worked with numerous internationally acclaimed filmmakers. She has done the sound for the documentary Honeyland in 2019, which was nominated for 2 Academy Awards. She herself is member of the sound branch of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, who bestows the awards. And most importantly, she has designed and created a sound installation for our exhibition that we'll talk about in a moment. Thank you for coming. Welcome. And our second guest is Frank Kruse, who has worked as a sound designer on so many different famous German and international films, like Goodbye Lenin, Sonnenallee, Baader-Meinhof-Komplex, and a lot of films by Tom Tykwer, especially his international productions like Cloud Atlas, A Hologram for the King, for which he received the German Film Award for Best Sound, and most recently the acclaimed series Babylon Berlin. And he has also worked on several international co-productions from the US, including 2 films by director Ron Howard, Rush, which is about the racing car rivals Niki Lauda and James Hunt, and In the Heart of the Sea, the true story behind Moby Dick, which is especially interesting for us tonight. Welcome to you too. Thank you for coming. The first question I would like to ask both of you is, how did you get into this profession, into this field? Because, I mean, one can imagine when you are a teenager and you like to take pictures that you become a director of photography. But what about sound? What was the decisive moment for you to say, okay, I want to do something with sound? Anna, maybe you first?
It's a very long story, but to make it very short and less dramatic than it is, then during the war, when I was 6, I used to tape record all the sounds around me when I was in the shelters and my voice. And it was like, after years, I understand it was a way for me to feel that I'm still alive and that we're not dead. So, I forgot about it. Then when I decided that I discovered that while doing cinema, I always wanted to study cinema, that there's a branch, the sound, that can be my job and my path in life. I said, yes, I remember I used to do that. So I was recording sounds since I was a kid, and I will always have this tendency not to look and to listen more than to look, because of all the atrocities that I saw. And when I discovered that it could be my life and my career and my path, I said, okay, I'm gonna take the advantage, and here I am.
And what about you, Frank?
My start is a little bit less dramatic, I would say. I finished school, and like most people finishing school, I didn't know really what to do, and I played in a band. I was a drummer. I played guitar, and then I moved to Berlin because I wanted to get away from home as quickly as possible. Not because I hated home, but I wanted to get out into the world. So I moved to Berlin because my father was a Berliner and the wall was still there. So this was in '88. And then I went, because, I don't know, through the music segment, I was always interested in music recording firstly and acoustics and stuff like that. So I started to study acoustics and at the Technical University in Berlin. But it wasn't really what I envisioned about what I would actually do there, because it's super like science heavy, lots of mathematics, etc., physics. And so I kept working and then the wall came down, and there was a huge like demand for so-called ENG assistants. Those are the men and women who kind of help camera people on daily news gathering, basically, carrying the tripod and booming the sound, etc. And then that felt really interesting, and it let me kind of have a decent living without working too much and still studying and play in bands and make music. But at some point I met a woman, and she studied camera at the film school in Potsdam-Babelsberg. And I had never heard about the school, and turns out they had a sound class, and it turns out that's one of the oldest, I think, film sound educations in Europe, I think. They've been training sound people in film for, I don't know, decades, many decades. So I applied for it more or less just as a lucky punch, and I was invited to take the audition, more or less, and they all of a sudden they let me in. They take like 10 people every year, and all of a sudden I was in the world of film sound. And before that, there was one kind of key film sound screening for me, which was a double feature of Eraserhead and Alien 1 and 2. I think Alien 3 didn't exist yet, which completely blew me away. And I stepped out of the cinema in the morning, and I didn't even know, what year is it? And so those were like, for many sound people, film sound people, those were the kind of the kickoff. So then I knew I really wanted to do this and fully focus on film sound.
Now the world of film sound, as you say, has a lot of different professions. You're credited mostly as sound designers, but of course there are sound editors, there's sound mixing, there is Foley artists, and for a layperson it's sometimes difficult to differentiate between those different professions. Can you define very briefly what is the job of a sound designer compared, for example, to a sound editor? Because I read that a sound editor is also creating sounds. So what is the difference there? Can you, Frank, maybe give a definition?
It's a bit of a blurry definition, especially the profession called sound designer. It was kind of, so they say, more or less invented the first time credited officially, I think, was on Apocalypse Now. Yeah, and for Walter Murch. And so he wanted to, before that, it was like, minions in black rooms in a sound facility, basically a company working on the soundtrack on perforated magnetic tape. And usually back then in Hollywood, the sound credit went to the CEO of the company running that facility, basically. So it was like saying, the boss of Siemens is doing the toast stuff. So he wanted to lift it more up in a more rewarding kind of artistic level, which it actually always has been. But that was, I think, the first time credit. But nowadays it's kind of, it's a bit of a cliche too. So usually people think that a sound designer is the guy who creates the spaceships and the explosions, etc. But usually it's more like an overall, like I would say, head of department, like the entire sound post-production. There's like it's usually a mix of the so-called supervising sound editor and the sound designer. Supervising sound editor being like 50% at least in logistic role, like organizing the the crew communicating with producers, etc., and then organizing the whole thing. But the sound designer nowadays, I would say, is the creative head of department. Like when you have a huge team, some people might work on a very small element or one reel of the film, depending on how it's organized. So there has to be one who keeps an eye on that everything stays, you know, one big idea, not just a mess of ideas where everyone chucks in.
And when it comes to logistics, I mean, you both have worked on films that have been shot over the entire world, basically. As a sound designer, are you ever on set when something is recorded and shot? I mean, for example, Rana Honeyland, I think, was shot in Macedonia, North Macedonia. Were you ever there, or are you only in your studio behind the mixing console? How does it work?
No, in Honeyland specifically, I came late. I came while they were editing. So I met them through Panoptic. They watched Panoptic, and we met in a festival in England. And but they started the editing, and they had no sound on set. It was really with the Zoom, and sometimes they didn't have a Zoom. It was like very badly recorded. So when they sent me the editing, I said, okay, it's very interesting, but really we have no sound. And the producer said, okay, we're gonna do it in mono because maybe we can't do it in 5.1. We can do it like very minimal. Said, I'm gonna try to clean it, and then and this is the role of the dialogue editor, who really did an amazing job cleaning everything through isotope and doing all. She did magic. And what was very challenging, because I didn't know anything about North Macedonia, so I used to watch a lot of reportage, a lot of things about like small documentaries about this space, and I heard the whole rushes. Even when they were talking, I was trying to see in the background what's the acoustic of the space, what does the space feels like, to just create the identity of the space. And then of course you do something, you create, you recreate, and you put layers of ambiences that are not necessarily from the space, but you need to really, this is how I work, to really feel the identity of a space, to really recreate the ambience properly.
What about you, Frank? For example, In the Heart of the Sea was shot around the Canary Islands and in a big water tank in the UK. Were you ever there, or just in Berlin?
No, I came in while they were still shooting, I think. Yeah, it was kind of towards the end of the shoot. And yeah, it turned out that basically 99% of the production sound, the original sound from set, was unusable because, as you said, it was shot in water tanks on the on a studio lot in Leavesden in London, with constant wind machines going. At some point we had a weird situation even for the picture editor, because they shot so much material, which is probably something that we will touch, because it was Anthony Dodmantle was the DP, and he's kind of famous / infamous for using tons and tons of cameras on set, like all sorts of cameras, like 35mm, the crappiest video cameras you can imagine, and GoPros and whatnot. So he just walks onto set and then he says, like, you know, camera there, camera here, everywhere. There's always like 10 cameras running, and same thing on Rush, which creates these extreme like perspectives and fisheye views. So there's no way for a boom operator who operates the mic and moves it around on set. There was no way to bring in a boom. So, but even the personal mics the actors were wearing on their bodies were unusable. The sound sounded literally like this. And I'm not exaggerating. This is how it sounded, like most of the time. The picture editor had to bring in like lip readers to because they were improvising a lot, going away from the original script, so he couldn't even look in the script and trace, okay, which part of the scene is this? Because they were constantly rolling. It was like 5-10 cameras just rolling, and because they couldn't really communicate with the actors, which were kind of getting blasted with huge loads of water, they couldn't even hear what the director was saying to them while this whole machinery was going. So even the director didn't really know which part of the scene we're in now, in this moment. So this was all assembled in the cutting room later, basically. So sometimes we got a scene where there was a dialogue scene that was, cut between two main protagonists, and then later turned out, after the lip reader came in and deciphered all the stuff just by looking at the picture, turned out that there were lines, like duplicate lines. So the actor said something, and then the other actor would respond, and then it would cut back to the first actor, and he repeated the same line. And this was during the rough cut for weeks without anyone noticing, because they couldn't hear what they were saying. And so they subtitled everything, and then so we had to reconstruct literally everything. Like everything you hear, I would say 99% is reconstructed afterwards.
But is usually the boom operator, die Tonangel, he's the sound person on set, and the sound designer is mostly in the studio, or
right? Yeah, there's a sound mixer and a boom operator. The sound mixer is the guy. He has a small mixing desk, and he listens to all the signals that can come in, like 10 radio mics tied to actors and maybe 1 or 2 boom operators, and he makes sure everything is captured so that for the time of the picture cut you can hear what the actors are saying. And later we come in and we listen to all the separate tracks. There might be like from 1, 2 or even 10, 12 different tracks with everyone on a separate track. And then we come in and clean all that up, so to get the best possible result from what they capture on set.
And you just said like 99% were not usable in the heart of the scene,
in this
right?
case, yes.
And now we slowly move towards the subject of water. Water as a filming location, as a setting, of course, bears a lot of challenges for any film profession. Like the director of photography needs special equipment. The cast and crew sometimes need to learn how to dive. And then especially the sound. Is it possible, can you, and this is basically a rhetorical question, can you just take a microphone, put it underwater and record the sound? And if not, why? Rainer?
It depends on what you want from underwater. You can put, there's hydrophones, you can put them to have like, they are specialized to record underground, but it's more like taking ambience and general feelings of the underwater. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but the things that the films that I worked, there were underwater animals. Or I just finished a documentary that there's a lot of underwater penguins and jellyfish, and we recreated all of this in the Foley room. So it's just, we put, for the example, there's ice cracking. I put like an hydrophone and another setup of mics on ice in the studio, like a huge bucket and with a huge amount of ice. And then you would drop like hot water to have those crackings. But usually I've never had like specific sound taken from the hydrophone. You recreate everything. I don't know if there's another way of doing things, but it's more the general crisp, the more electronic sometimes that you can take from underwater.
Because I read that that water transmits sound waves quite differently. It has a different speed, a different pressure, different frequency, so it's much lower and also much louder. So I imagine even if you can record sounds, you can't really use them. You have to adjust them a little bit or change the volume or something like that.
You can, yeah. You can definitely record like in a scientifically correct way underwater. I mean, the problems in a way is that water has a 5 times higher speed of sound, more towards like if you put your ear on a piece of metal, and it transmits like extremely far. So you have things that you hear over these mics sound super close, but they can be miles away. Like I ran into this problem often when we recorded the sounds for some scenes in Babylon, also in Heart of the Sea, that you have a lot of an extreme pollution of acoustic pollution, I would say, noise underwater, way more than you hear. So above the water, we went to a very calm lake, we thought, And for example, and you're outside, you hear nothing in March. You know, it's freezing cold, and there's not even birds, nothing. And then you dip your mic into the lake, and you hear like a small fisherman's motorboat, which you can't even see because it's like 20 kilometers around the corner of the lake, which is formed like this. So all of a sudden you realize how much sound is down there, which is probably the reason why there's so many stories now that whales, you know, have problems to communicate because there's a super tanker floating by like in 1,000 miles distance. So yeah, but I think the original sound underwater is quite interesting, but it's the problem as film sound people, you run into you're haunted by cliches of the past and learned experience that people have learned from watching films. Because if you take a Disney film from the 50s or whatever, the sound was created essentially like, you know, a microphone here and then a straw into a glass and someone making bubbles, and then that was used as underwater sound basically. And usually our expectations for underwater sound is like muffled and ominous and dark and but if you dip a good hydrophone into water, it's like super clear and crisp. So it's often is the problem that a director would say, this doesn't sound like underwater. It's like, do you record, is this just a brook in a forest or something? So you have to find a middle ground of fulfilling, like, to create this world.
Okay, before we'll listen now to an example of In the Heart of the Sea to see how the sound is creating the scene. I want to talk to you a little bit about the sound installation you've done for the exhibition, because it's such an incredible piece of work, and we're so grateful that you did that. And I can only encourage everyone to go to the exhibition, forget the rest, just go into that room and listen to that soundscape, which is 40 minutes. It's called Vortex, Cities and Memories. And we will hear a little excerpt in a minute, but first, can you just give a short idea about the concept, your thoughts behind that?
The concept is because now water is really traumatizing to us because of all the refugees that are really dying in the water, and especially after the blast of 2 years ago. There was a lot of people who died in the sea, and we didn't find them. So my relationship with water, with underwater, really changed because when I was a kid, small, and even like few years ago, it was maybe a relaxing environment, because when you put your head and your ears underwater, it's really relaxing. You hear even the voices muffled, and you're in your own bubble, your own world. But now for me, there's something like sound of the undead people under the sea. So I said, and we are really we're feeling the being trapped in Beirut these days. You know, you're feeling that you have no connection to the outside world. You are like in your danger zone, but you cannot really move and vibrate throughout the city. So the whole concept came that I felt it's like the water became like electric shocks. It became like electronic. It became like electricity in my body. That's why, like, after the blast, for example, until now, I can't go into the sea, because for me there's something electrifying in the sea. I can't swim easily. I'm always anxious. I can't and it's very personal. And so I said, okay, how can I really do a composition that is really worldwide, with all the sounds that all the people took, so I can be universal, I can be in contact with all the people. That's why I contacted Tim Nelson and Al Circuit, because they did a huge initiative to collect whole sound during COVID and before COVID of the whole sound people on the globe, to put like sound. And we did like a small piece for Berlinale 2 years or 3 years ago. And then I told them that I'm gonna do something with all the sounds. So Tim said, do it. And I took like sounds. I took sounds of meat I took from water in Beirut, some sounds I created, the electronic part of the sound. And I asked, because I wanted like a group effort, not only me taking the sounds, but it was the whole sound people of the whole globe. And I wanted really my team of the studio to really put their input. So I asked everyone, like the dialogue editor, sound editor, and the Foley artist, to record on their phone what is underwater for them. So they talked about, and there's a lot of similarities between the whole stories. Another part of Lama Sawaya, she's doing like re-recording mixer these days. And I asked her, can you mix the whole piece as you wish? And we will discuss it later. So it was the whole input, her input, not the way I want to mix it, but her input. And then we did the pan, and we discussed about which sound will be from the rear speaker, etc. But it was more a collaborative work. And these days, I'm really longing, and I'm really excited about projects that we do all together in groups, like having more member of the teams, trying to communicate more, because we're so isolated, and especially after COVID, we've had so isolated that communication, listening to each other, listening to the different methods of working, and trying to be together doing like a huge composition. It's really what I like, and that was the result.
Okay, then we're going to listen now to a little clip from that soundscape, Vortex, Cities and Memories. So please play the clip.
Underwater, the most claustrophobic place I can be. The unknown that exists. The depth, the movement and stillness at the same time. The inability to see properly. The inability to hear properly. The inability to breathe at all. Only feeling everything. Knowing your senses aren't working at 100%. Overwhelming and terrifying and violent, to be so out of control. But a sensation I find myself craving most as well. The feeling of sinking willingly. The feeling on your skin. The silence and pressure. The feeling your body can't handle for too long, but a feeling you seek. Feel the water lift your hair, making it move at a different pace. Everything you know is different. Giving parts of yourself to the water. Allowing it to swallow you, even if just for a moment. The feeling I crave. And the feeling I fear most.
Okay. Yeah, applause for that. Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah, so it is. I mean, at least that's how I feel. It puts you in a state of unease the whole time. So it's far away from the wondrous underwater world of dolphins and whale song. The voice we heard was Vanessa Kanan, a dialogue editor, and you worked with women who all work in Lebanon as different sound artists. And I think this was the intention, to put you in this state of unease and to represent this, to hint at the world right now, which is torn apart between war and pandemic and everything. And it fits perfectly to the exhibition, because I'm also interested in the dark, ominous, dangerous side of the underwater world. It's not just fish swimming in an exotic landscape. So thank you again very much for this work, and we hope we will be able to show it to as many people as possible. We stay with the dangerous side, and we come to Moby Dick, or at least the whale that kind of inspired the Moby Dick story. So Frank, you have worked on many different underwater scenes with very different qualities. For example, the car crash in Cloud Atlas with Halle Berry, where her car fills with water, the windows burst, so it's a very loud, dramatic scene. And then there is a hologram for the king. We have a very soft, tender scene with Tom Hanks and Sarita Choudhury kissing each other underwater, which is basically only music, almost.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then we have In the Heart of the Sea, where we have this giant white whale destroying entire ships. So how do you approach these different scenes? And how did it work in case of In the Heart of the Sea? How did you, as you said, 99% you had to create? Can you show us an example and tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, it was a tricky challenge, just because we didn't want to steer away too far from, or make it too, let's say, too wrong in a way, so that, a whale scientist sitting in the cinema would kind of get up, be upset, and leave the room, which they probably still do, the way we treated it in the end. But so we wanted to stick to, leave a little bit of scientific correctness in there, especially with reference to the sperm whale in there. So Ron Howard asked us to, he had this strange experience that he told us. He went diving with dolphins, and he had this experience from a dolphin coming close, and what they apparently do, and I didn't know this, they smack their jaws together as a means to either impress someone or kind of a way of communicating. I'm not sure, but he was impressed by the loudness of it, and it terrified him quite a lot, and he fed us all these personal experience of his. And then I contacted a sperm whale scientist at the university in the UK and talked to him, because one of the problems was he wanted the whale to be emotional. It should transport aggression, sadness, fear, and it needed to be very powerful, this huge animal, to find a sound for this huge object in the water, etc. So the biggest challenge was actually when he sent me actual recordings from sperm whales. Some of you might know this. Let me jump to one. I hope this works. So he sent me a few recordings, and I imported it into my computer, and this was what we heard. And he told me that this example is a sperm whale being super excited and in his utmost emotional state. And I thought, like, I thought, like, oh my God, how is this going to work? So it was like, first I thought that there was something wrong, and the machine was kind of just spitting out electronic artifacts, but that's what they sounded. And this is an animal the size of this room, you know, so, or even bigger. So it was immediately clear, okay, we cannot transport all these requests based on scientific correct sounds. It's just impossible. So it ended up as a mix of the original sounds and modified other animals, especially to transport like aggression and emotion and movement. Especially, it was very tricky because there are lots of scenes where a huge whale just flies by like a huge spaceship. So we need a lot of power. You know, it's still you know, should be an entertaining movie, etc., with big sounds and big images, etc. So that was kind of a challenge to find, like, you know, walking this borderline between falling off the cliff of being completely ignorant to science and what these especially these whales actually do, because most people know belugas and other humpback whales with their very atmospheric songs and singing, but unfortunately sperm whales are the exact opposite. It's just these electronic clicks and yeah. So we had to invent our own whale. That was pretty clear from the start, and yeah. Let's jump to. Oh, and then one briefing we gave us, which refers to one of your screening as well, that you're going to have to this movie Leviathan, or I don't know how to pronounce it in English correctly, but Leviathan.
I think it's Leviathan, yeah.
A documentary. I thought he's talking about this Russian film that's set in the Arctic, but then it was a documentary about a fishing boat, and it's basically one night they go out to fish. And it's all, there's basically no dialogue, and it's all filmed with these tiny GoPro cameras that just in these super extreme perspective. It's always what you see is what you hear. So they used mainly the microphones from these cameras. So, and you have scenes like where a fisher is kind of slicing up a fish, and then he throws the guts from the fish into a huge bucket, and the camera just follows that and dumps into the blood. So, and then the lens is covered in slime and blood and
something to look forward to. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a really atmospheric film and super fascinating once you get into it. It takes a while to it's kind of a challenge for the viewer, but it's also very interesting, and Ron Howard used that as a visual inspiration also for the shoot. So there are a lot of scenes where the camera just dips underwater, comes out, and he wanted this kind of direct audio feel but in a big kind of Hollywood way, but kind of again find a way to not be like that documentary, so extreme, but use that as a inspiration. So that's why we followed the visuals were very inspiring from Anthony Dodd Mantle as well, because he tried to do the same thing, like dipping in and out of the water. We can watch, for instance, the first whale hunt.
I have to say that I prefer it without the music. It's much more visceral, much more interesting to listen to like that. And what sounds did you use for the whale? How did you?
That was the end result, but the reality is. Where's my mouse? I can show you a little picture. It might be. It's slightly anecdotal, but.
Because here you can actually see the similarity to or hear what you just described about Leviathan.
Exactly. That's what I mentioned before. So all the rowing and the oars, and which have a huge role in this film, is basically me and my coworker Marcus in March of that year in freezing cold, recording. Just this is the banal reality of how these things are done. you know, throwing a mic into a lake to get clean recordings of these ores, because there was no, you know, this is very hard to recreate in a Foley studio where, you know, a Foley artist, Geräuschemacher, is doing that in a little bucket of water. Needs to be kind of sound real. So yeah, it's funny. And then it's layers and layers of other sounds, like you hear the low end kind of bassy stuff. It's pitch down water elements. In our studio, we built a huge water ramp where we dumped, like, it's essentially recreating the water chute that they had on set. It's like a big, how do you call that? Was heißt Rutsche?
Slide.
Slide, exactly. Thank you. Like a big slide with a huge tank on top, and then the tank is released, and then you have a couple of 1,000 liters of water kind of gushing into the water tank, into the actors. And so we did a mini version of that and recorded that in our studio backlot, and to create all these water elements that we could then pitch down and make them big, because that's a bit of a I wouldn't say a problem, but a challenge is that the reality is often less fun than what you need for such a film, at least. You know? For Leviathan, it's a totally different thing and concept, obviously. But like you saw that the film, the visuals work a lot with kind of going under and over, and very short cuts, and kind of being super extreme perspective, like very close fish eyes. So yeah, it's a fun job to create all these details. So
yeah, it's
I mean,
it's very. I mean, we could watch like a lot of other examples, but we still need to screen Leviathan.
Yeah,
so
exactly. It's total spoiler alert.
And so I have one last question, and then maybe some of the audience has another question. Is there, from all the stuff you've done that is related to water, is there anything where you would say that was the biggest challenge, or something where you say that I'm the most proud of? Rano, is there anything we say?
I didn't work much on underwater. I just, like I told you, I finished like a very small part of this documentary was underwater. I can't say I don't have really much experience in underwater. I'm still trying. Even in Panoptic, the little part of the underwater was really the raw sound that the camera, the GoPro took. It's just I added like the small oxygen breathing, but in underwater I really have no, more than 2 or 3 experience to say that that's it. But every single sound that, the challenge you put yourself, and you said in this film I'm gonna do that, or I'm gonna create the wave or the underwater or the splash in another way, in a different way. It's every time you put a challenge to yourself, you said, okay, that's it. Now I did it in that way. And every film you put another challenge to create things more interesting.
Yeah, I think it's often often underwater scenes are either, like you mentioned in Hologram for the King, they drift off into a completely different headspace, and it's not at all about being. Of course, it's about being underwater, but it's about being losing gravity and floating around and being on a different planet or completely different emotional level. That's one side, and then often the other side is something like this, where you have to create a subjective reality, to create sounds that are completely off the board in terms of what it really is, but you want the audience to believe, okay, this is actually the real camera being there with just one microphone, just taping that, and that's how it sounded. So that's often kind of the spectrum for a film. I must say, personally, I always enjoy when there are scenes where you have people speaking, or performing, I would say, dialogues, underwater, to make that work, because that brings another level of, because underwater there's always this archetypic thing of dying, and not being able to breathe, and that people speaking underwater are actually not being able to breathe underwater brings a new emotional level in those scenes. So creating that is always, I must say, I've great fun doing that. You know, with ADR, where we, for instance, on Babylon Berlin, we threw actors into a pool and recorded them underwater, performing that dialogue, because that's something that's really hard to create with a simulation of that, because you need the voice pressing against the water pressure and the bubbles coming out, etc. I have an example for that if we have time for it.
Any more questions? There's one question over there. Yeah.
What about the composers of film music? Is there any exchange of ideas or maybe action between them and you, the sound designers? Because often in films you hear those simultaneously, sound and the music.
Who wants to answer?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because it's ideally there should be a lot of communication between us and the music, because they should become the soundtrack should become not a fight between music and effects and dialogue. It should be one. There should be a concept for it, and just not everyone throws the same thing at the screen, basically. So yes, there should be, but often, like especially in these kind of huge films, the crew comes on fairly late in the process, when the rough cut has already been going for 6 months or something. So there's already temp music in place that is taken from another film, and then the composer comes in and says, okay, it's Teardrop from Massive Attack again, okay, and the director is attached to it, so what do we do now, etc. So they're facing similar challenges, but ideally, so like the director, I work a lot for Tom Tykwer, he never uses temp music and he writes his own music, so there's a extremely close cooperation in that case, because that's a really hands-on process where sound and music basically develop together.
All right, thank you very much. If there's no other pressing question, I'd say we start with the film. It's not a long film, it's an 85-minute film. Leviathan, the documentary, and if you want to compare it with In the Heart of the Sea, as I said, morgen läuft Im Herzen der See hier um 20:15 Uhr und am Sonntag nochmal um 17:45 Uhr. Vielen Dank für die Aufmerksamkeit. Many, many thanks to you two for coming here, for showing your examples. Ja, viel Spaß mit dem Film und danke fürs Zuhören.
Thank you.